Welcome to our fellowship, the welcome to the UU Fellowship of Ames, Iowa on the St. Patrick's Day on the 17th of March. And I'm going to let Jeff do the introductions.
Well, even though we're on Zoom today, most of our usually scheduled things are still happening. So join us for the monthly social justice service circle after this service. And it's in a different Zoom meeting, though. So you'll need to find the link on your latest weekly email. So it's a different link. This Tuesday, March 19th, the Art Exhibition Committee will welcome Ames area artists to our building for a special reception. This is co-hosted by the committee, the Ames Community Arts Council, and our current artist, Kathy Zvak. This event is open to the public, so please come and bring your guests and make them feel welcome to the fellowship and to our gallery in the round. Lastly, as we prepare to meet and vote for our new minister, the UUA Transition Office has asked us to review information covered in our Breaking Barriers training, which focus on implicit or unconscious biases. Now, the takeaway from this is that these unexamined biases can hamper positive decision making, which is especially crucial as we call a new minister. So please check out your March 15th weekly email for a list of these biases with a short definitions of them. Giving, by the way, today may be done online at uufa.org, uufames.org, by clicking on the donate button. And on behalf of this caring and nurturing congregation, I welcome each and every one of you to this sacred space, this sacred virtual space, where we invite you to an experience of transformation, hope, renewal, and connection, which may inspire you to understand life in new ways. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jeff. Let us be drawn in by Jason Sheldon. In the world of the driven, let us be drawn in. Let your love be a given, let us be drawn in. To imagine, to dream, to create, to redeem, for the sake of the living, let us be drawn in. Matt will provide our chalice lighting.
Good morning, everybody. Our chalice lighting this morning is from the Velveteen Rabbit. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day when they were lying side by side near the nursery fender before Nana came to tidy the room. "Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and a stick-out handle?" "Real isn't how you are made," said the Skin Horse. "It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." "Well, does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the Skin Horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" he asked, "or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the Skin Horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't often happen to people who break easily or have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand."
Thank you, Matt. Our opening music is 123 in our hymnal, and it is Spirit of Life by Carolyn McDade. Mary Richards will offer our first reading.
Our first reading is from A House for Hope, The Promise of Progressive Religion for the 21st Century by John A. Burens and Rebecca Ann Parker. And this section is by the Reverend Dr. Burens, who was president of the Unitarian Universalist Association from 1993 to 2001. He is currently one of our most prominent UU philosophers and has written numerous books in UU history and theology. And he begins with a quote from Annie Dillard. "We are here to abet creation and to witness to it, to notice each other's beautiful face and complex nature," declares Annie Dillard, "so that creation need not play to an empty house." And Dr. Burens continues, "But a changing God can be hard to recognize. We go looking for something godlike, but ultimately idolatrous, and we do so in all the wrong places. How we go out looking changes as well. Changes in culture and circumstance change even the most seemingly solid ground of our understanding and search. The Needham Meeting House, where I preach most Sundays, seems to testify to this truth. Now it rests upon a recently renovated foundation, restored for the 21st century. But a quick review of our parish history discloses that new foundations have been laid under our house of hope and worship several times before. In fact, the meeting house had new foundations laid in 1720, 1774, 1836, 1879, when the whole building was moved, 1922, and then, before the 2008 renovation, around 60 years ago, in 1948. Liberal theologian Paul Tillich was then preaching his sermons, speaking of God as the ground of being. These became a book called The Shaking of the Foundations. But religious history suggests that we only touch any absolute ground of being indirectly, through stones quarried locally, then very humanly mortared together. We can easily come to believe that our human constructions are absolute and eternal, but they are temporary structures, habitations for the time being. And we can forget that God too is changing. The changing foundations of our house for hope correspond roughly to successive new eras in the history of liberal theology in America as a whole.
Thank you, Mary. Now the first meditation by Matt Ferris.
Good morning, everyone. I'm coming to you from Swannanoa, North Carolina, the current and ancestral lands of the Cherokee people. The topic for our two meditations today is one that I've been thinking a lot about since the summer of 2021, when I became a delegate at General Assembly for the UUFA. At least since 2020, but really long before then, the world of Unitarian Universalism has been in a deep and profound process of discerning its vision as a religious movement. There are many valid ways to characterize this process of revision and covenant revitalization. Concretely, what is happening is that this summer's GA will determine whether there will be significant changes to the UUA's bylaws that will dramatically affect the language of our 8 principles and 6 sources. In fact, in all likelihood, the language of the 8 principles and 6 sources will disappear. But that's just the beginning of the story. What I intend to do today is offer you 2 different kinds of answers to the question, what's up with the proposed revisions? In this first meditation, I'll do my level best to lay out some of the most relevant facts related to the proposed revisions of Article 2. I'll frequently refer to the official Article 2 Study Report 2021 to 2023 so that we can all become more familiar with the document that's at the heart of the proposed revisions. I aim for this first meditation to be helpful to you as a faithful rendering of the language intended to poetically represent meaningful changes already at work in our living tradition. My personal appeal to you is this: pay attention. You need to know this stuff. In the second meditation, I'll further reflect on some significant aspects of the proposed revisions, along with some stunning and sublime implications for us. I'm going to go out on a limb and explain what I really think about what's up with the proposed revisions. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. I won't bury the lead. Unitarian Universalism hasn't had a haircut since 1985, and the delegates for this summer's GA are being given scissors, electric shavers, and more product than an entire season of Queer Eye. We're going to be looking gorgeous, but all that old hair just has to come off. Where to begin with an explanation of the proposed Article 2 revisions of the UUA bylaws is tricky. We could go back to 2017, when serious discussions about changes to the 7 principles were introduced at GA, particularly the 8th principle. We could go back to 1985, when the 7 principles and the 6 sources, as we know them, were first adopted. We could go back to 1961, when the Unitarians and Universalists merged and generated aspirational language about the new association's purpose, a dedication to key objectives. In 1961, at that exciting and innovative inauguration of something quite special, the 6 principles looked strikingly different from the 8 we have today. But let's start with the fact that the current Article 2 Study Commission's initial charge from the UUA Board of Trustees was issued in 2020. I commend to you the UUA's website for information about the Article 2 Study Commission, a timeline of the study's events, the official Article 2 study report, and other vital information. By way of a brief overview, what you need to know about the Article 2 Study Commission is that it was established by the board in 2020 to conduct a process of reviewing and revising Article 2 of the UUA's bylaws. The Commission's Article 2 study report begins with information that all UUs should know. I'm quoting here. Article 2 of the Unitarian Universalist Association bylaws, principles and purposes, is the foundation for all of the work of our UUA and its member congregations and covenanted communities. It is the covenant to which all of our congregations and covenanted communities pledge themselves when they become members of our UUA. Again, while the proposed revisions we're considering today are the result of an effort by the Commission that started in 2020, what prompted the board to act in the first place is noteworthy. The introduction to the Commission's study report highlights that, quote, there have been many projects, resolutions, task forces, and other strategies that have come from the board, the Commission on Appraisal, and grassroots groups which encourage us to take a look at our principles, purposes, bylaws, and rules. It is time for us to do a review and make changes so that we are living into the Unitarian Universalism of the future, a Unitarian Universalism that holds us in times of great need and ethical, moral, and spiritual crises. We are in one of those times now. The frequently asked questions section of the UUA's website, devoted to Article 2 study and revisions, offers further context. It asks, why change Article 2 now? In part, it says, quote, Unitarian Universalism is a living tradition that learns and adapts to meet the needs of each generation. It's been nearly 40 years since a comprehensive review and revision of Article 2. You know, 40 years ago, I was in elementary school. The phone in the kitchen of my house attached to the wall and had a dial on it. Roe v. Wade was still a recent decision. George Floyd was a little kid living in Houston. And it was genuinely a big deal for women to be having a significant voice in revising the 6 principles from the 1961 document, which in part was dedicated, and I quote, to encourage cooperation with men of goodwill in every land. I could go on. So let's get a better handle on what's currently happening with the proposed Article 2 revisions. Article 2 in the UUA bylaws is the Principles and Purposes section. This is where we find our 7 principles and 6 sources. The 8th principle, which our congregation has judiciously adopted, doesn't even appear there. It's too recent. Article 2 contains more than the 7 principles and 6 sources, but I simply want to focus on that important section today. What the proposed changes to Article 2 would do is eliminate all of the language of the 7 principles and 6 sources. Yes, this revision is a replacement. If the delegates at GA vote in favor of the revisions by a 2/3 majority, the 2 new sections would effectively eliminate the 7 principles and 6 sources language. In their place would be a section called Values and Covenant, and one called inspirations. Now here comes the fun part, the replacement language. Listen carefully now. The values and covenant section reads as follows, and I quote, "As Unitarian Universalists, we covenant, congregation to congregation and through our association, to support and assist one another in our ministries. We draw from our heritages of freedom, reason, hope, and courage, building on the foundation of love. Love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. Inseparable from one another, these shared values are justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity." So the full list of our proposed 7 shared values is love, justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity. I've listed them in that order because a UU colleague of mine in seminary shared a useful mnemonic for remembering the 7 shared values. Love, jet pig. Love, jet pig. Now, the way this section of Article 2 works is that each of the 7 shared values is given an expression of the named value, and then what we covenant to in relationship with that value. For instance, one of my faves is, quote, pluralism. We celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. A gold star goes to everyone who heard 7 principle language in there. Essentially, the 7 shared values language replaces the 7 principle language while drawing from it with love as our primary value. The 7 principles have been distilled, simplified, and rendered as something more fundamental than principles, statements of value. Similarly, the 6 sources language in the Article 2 revisions is replaced with a succinct and expansive statement of what's being called our inspirations. The new language reads as follows, quote, "As Unitarian Universalists, we use and are inspired by sacred and secular understandings that help us to live into our values. We respect the histories, contexts, and cultures in which they were created and are currently practiced. These sources ground us and sustain us in ordinary, difficult, and joyous times. Grateful for the religious ancestries we inherit and the diversity which enriches our faith, we are called to ever deepen and expand our wisdom." As with the new language for the 7 shared values, this inspiration language distills, simplifies, and builds upon the vision of the 6 sources. It is noteworthy that the new inspirations language neither privileges nor marginalizes any specific religions or wisdom traditions. That secular wisdom is on par with so-called sacred wisdom, and that we are called upon to respect the contexts, historical and otherwise, of the wisdom traditions from which we draw insight for living well. So, to wrap up this first meditation, the proposed Article 2 language would replace the 7 principles and 6 sources with new language emphasizing our 7 shared values, grounded in love, and an open-ended statement affirming that we are inspired by unenumerated sacred and secular sources of wisdom.
We now enjoy the music sung by the Chancel Choir of the First Unitarian Church of Oakland, number 352 in our hymnal, Find a Stillness.
Find a stillness, oh, a stillness, let a stillness carry me. Find a silence, hold the silence, let the silence carry me. In the Spirit, by the Spirit, with the Spirit giving power, I will find true harmony. Seek the essence, oh, the essence, let the essence carry me. Let me flower, help me flower, watch me flower, carry me. In the Spirit, by the Spirit, with the Spirit giving power, I will find true harmony.
Our second reading is from Blessing the World, What Can Save Us Now by Rebecca Ann Parker. Rebecca Parker was a longtime president and professor of theology from Starr King School of Ministry, one of our two UU seminaries. She is now professor emeritus with John Barons. She wrote A House of Hope, from which we heard from sections in our first reading. I now read to you from her book, Blessing the World, What Can Save Us Now? Reconstructing Our Faith. The path to deeper spirituality begins in the experience of promises failed, covenant broken, hope suppressed. It begins with the disillusionment, impasse, and grief, and it passes through the fire of a new revelation. In our time, seekers wander from church to church asking, "Can you answer my despair?" Ranters cry out in the public square, their anguish filling public space with the witness of collective breach of faith. We suppress the speaker and the ranters, whether within us or around us, at our peril, for each is part of a path from broken covenant to fresh discovery of the deeper resources of hope and strength. The pain of disappointment gives rise to our new practice of and new covenants that are strong enough to move us beyond the limits of our inheritance into fresh hope and creativity. Stillness that listens and rage that protests will give us a new covenant if we have the courage to refuse, to flee from our tears, and embody in everyday practices that we come to know. Given the lessons of history, I offer these possible expressions of our covenant: to keep faith with our source of life, knowing that we are not our own and that earth made us; to keep faith with the community of resistance, never forgetting that life can be saved from that which threatens it, by even small bands of people choosing to input into practice to alternative ways of life, and to seek the ever deepening awareness of which springs up inwardly in us, even when our hearts are broken by our own failure or by failure of others, even when we have done all we can and life is still broken. There is a universal love that has never broken faith with us and never will. This is the bold ground of our faith and the reason that we can behold in seeking to fulfill the promise. Now I'm going to share my screen again so that we can hear Matt's second meditation.
I'd like to begin this second meditation by acknowledging that the proposed Article 2 revision replacements are disruptive, agitating, and imperfect. An honest appraisal of the change the proposed revisions inaugurates must come to terms with the sense of loss that many of us anticipate feeling. The 7 principles and 6 sources may be the closest thing we have had to commonly held wisdom statements in our explicitly creedless religious movement. There is a high degree of ambiguity in Unitarian Universalism, and now some precious core dimensions of clarity and stability for us are probably going the way of history. Most of us have given our UU elevator speech, grounded in 7 principles and 6 sources language, more times than we can count. If the proposed revision replacements are adopted, we're all going to have to begin anew, figuring out what to include in response to questions about what Unitarian Universalists believe in. Transformation can indeed be painful, my friends. Yet transformation is necessary for growth. And once we align with transformation as a source of sacred change, perhaps we can find a peacefulness in its rhythms, cycles, beginnings, and ends, in the productive potential it reveals to us. The new Article 2 language associated with transformation as one of our fundamental values is pithy. I quote, "Transformation. We adapt to the changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages, never complete and never perfect." Candidly, I feel uplifted by the fact that the succinct wisdom of this new language can help me cope with the destabilization I feel as I anticipate the Article 2 replacements. These changes are indeed transformative, and it's okay if we're uneasy about the process of adapting to new things. The new language even admits to its limitations as never complete and never perfect. Well, ain't that the truth? Read the report yourself. Somebody has to teach the Article 2 Study Commission about the Oxford comma, stat. Some of the language demands a red pen and further revision. But seriously, the new language isn't just aspirational, it's also very real, brass tacks, the stuff of daily life. I want to be transparent with you. Last summer, during General Assembly, as I was contemplating how to vote as a delegate on your behalf, I had a lot of what I call, oh shit, moments. Even though I'd been a delegate in the 2 years prior to last summer, and I'd done my homework, and I recognized the way the tide was flowing, I still had an almost overwhelming sense of eventfulness. The democratic proceedings of thousands of UUs gathered together to make vital choices for our collective future was like the fool in the Tarot taking us over a precipice onto an extraordinary new journey. In my oh shit moments, I was saying to myself, this is going to change everything. Is this really happening? But in other moments of clarity and peacefulness, of inner silence, I was whispering to myself, We are in the process of becoming a better version of ourselves here. This is truly extraordinary. For me, one of the ways the new Article 2 language represents and promotes a better version of ourselves is in the inspirations section. I will say that, in my view, to call this section inspirations is regrettably uninspired. I may be inspired by all sorts of things, like a good documentary. Have you seen My Octopus Teacher? Or I've been inspired by a friend who has the willpower to be a vegan. Even no cheese? But Section C-2.3 of the proposed Article 2 revisions would be more aptly titled Sources of Wisdom. As a refresher, here's what that section says, quote, "As Unitarian Universalists, we use and are inspired by sacred and secular understandings that help us to live into our values. We respect the histories, contexts, and cultures in which they were created and are currently practiced. These sources ground us and sustain us in ordinary, difficult, and joyous times. Grateful for the religious ancestries we inherit and the diversity which enriches our faith, we are called to ever deepen and expand our wisdom." Folks, the 6 sources are one of the main reasons I recognized that Unitarian Universalism could be a beloved community for me. As a university professor teaching philosophy and religious studies courses, I preached the gospel of philosophia, the love of wisdom, the pursuit and practice of living well. Maybe more than anything else, what makes Unitarian Universalism distinct as a religious movement is that it cherishes wisdom wherever it is found. The 6 sources are a wonderful historical expression of our pluralism, but they are an impoverished list of the sources of wisdom we actually draw upon for living well. The new inspiration section does a much better job of characterizing our authentic love of wisdom in its myriad forms and contexts. Quoting the new language again, pluralism. We celebrate that we are all sacred beings diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. You see what I just did there? I just drew upon the wisdom language of another of the proposed 7 shared values to highlight something cool about our inspirations. Honestly, though, I can't really take credit for being clever. Another virtue of the new Article 2 language is that it is cohesive, self-referential, and consistent. The 7 principles and 6 sources are indeed inspired, but they don't provide us with a cohesive, self-referential, and consistent foundation for our living tradition. Our new House for Hope builds upon and improves what's best in the 7 principles and 6 sources. The inspirations and 7 shared values are integrated. They cooperate and collaborate with one another. Rather than a profound collection of strands, they form a web for wisdom, instruction for living well. In the Spirit, by the Spirit, with the Spirit giving power, I will find true harmony. Before I wrap up, I'm going to gird my loincloth, let my freak flag fly, and offer a statement I humbly believe to be prophetic. Within the next 15 years, maybe 30, when it will come time to consider revising Article 2 and the revision replacements we've been meditating upon today, we are going to have to do something courageous, honest, something our integrity demands of us. we're going to have to change our name. We are going to have to change our name. The fact of the matter is, very few of us are really Unitarians or Universalists. And even fewer of us are Unitarian Universalists. I appreciate, value, and respect our UU history. I particularly appreciate, value, and respect our heretical history within the context of Christian history. Now, having said that, since at least 1985, if not since our merger in 1961, we have been something other than heretical Christians. Our beloved community is home to atheists, Jewish Buddhists, religious humanists, Roman Catholics, pagans, and all manner of other than heretical Christians. We are beautifully diverse in our worldviews, cultures, backgrounds, and orientations. We are what religious studies scholars call sui generis, of its own kind, unique, distinct. In A House for Hope, the promise of progressive religion for the 21st century, John Burens, former president of the UUA, says, quote, "Changes in culture and circumstance change even the most seemingly solid ground of our understanding." We have been Unitarians and Universalists. We have been Unitarian Universalists. Now we are something else, something with its own charism, its own spiritual gifts. The proposed Article 2 revision replacements are the next step in building our foundation, our courageous, honest expression of who we are, what we stand for, and what we covenant to. From the days remembered burns a beacon bright and clear, guiding hands and hearts and spirits into faith set free from fear. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion meet to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin. I'd like to conclude with the words of Rebecca Ann Parker, former president and professor of theology at Starr King School for the Ministry, from her book, Blessing the World, What Can Save Us Now? I quote, "Given the lessons of history, I offer these possible expressions of our covenant. To keep faith with the source of life, knowing that we are not our own and that earth made us. To keep faith with the community of resistance, never forgetting that life can be saved from that which threatens it by even small bands of people choosing to put into practice an alternative way of life, and to seek an ever deeper awareness of that which springs up inwardly in us, even when our hearts are broken by our own failure or the failure of others, even when we have done all we can and life is still broken. There is a universal love that has never broken faith with us and never will. This is the ground of our hope and the reason that we can be bold in seeking to fulfill the promise. Beloveds, it is not a foregone conclusion that the Article 2 Study Commission revisions will be formally adopted this summer at GA. Our democratic process requires a vote by delegates. If the vote passes, the 7 principles and 6 sources will disappear from the UUA's bylaws, but they will also endure as vital expressions of our shared wisdom. My hope is that the Article 2 replacement revisions will pass. In my estimation, they are an impressive revitalization of our living tradition. As the African philosopher Bayo Akomolafe reminds us, quote, "The ordinary is what the extraordinary wants to become." The Article 2 Study Commission changes to the UUA's bylaws want our extraordinary religious movement to become ordinary for us someday. For our sacred, secular, beloved community to simply actually be a home for love, justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity. For the daily pursuit and practice of wisdom to be the norm for our living tradition. May it be so.
Thank you, Matt. Wow. Our closing music is number 1028 from our Teal hymnal, The Fire of Commitment.
From the light of days remembered burns a beacon bright and clear, guiding hands and hearts and spirits into faith set free from fear. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion meet to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin. From the stories of our living rings a song both brave and free, calling pilgrims still to witness to the life of liberty. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion need to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin. From the dreams of youthful vision comes a new prophetic voice, which demands a deeper justice built by our courageous choice. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion need to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin.
Matt will offer our final words and benediction.
Thank you so much, everybody. You know, one of the key characteristics of our Soul Matters program is what we call deep listening. And I'm really grateful that all of you have been so attentively listening. I know that that is a lot. It's a lot to digest. And I took liberties with our time today. But my hope is that it gives you something to feel informed about, and that having heard about these changes, you can be fearful, but hopeful. And I think that that is a strength of our community, that we are constantly changing. I'd like to invite you all to stick around afterwards so that we can discuss some of this if you'd like. I'll be hanging around, and I'm happy to take questions. I know that this is it's complex and it is also hugely significant. The benediction for today's service comes from Theodore Parker, and one of our preeminent UU historians says that Theodore Parker is perhaps the most influential Unitarian minister of his era, which was the mid-1800s. So listen to this, check this out. This is our benediction. Be ours a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple, all space. Its shrine, the good heart. Its creed, the all truth. Its ritual, works of love. Its profession of faith, divine living. Thank you so much, and blessed be you all.